Okay, welcome. Welcome everyone. Hello, Ian, the first to pop up on my screen. Hi there. And Marcy, wonderful. Okay. Hmm. It's lovely to see your images, and also even more so perhaps the various points in the world from which we are gathering. Wonderful. Good. All right, well, I'll let everyone come in so we can have a look, see at everyone here. And then I have a few thoughts about what I wanted to do today. Mostly, again, I have a feeling that many of you are familiar with these teachings, specifically the teachings around Tantra Yoga Alchemy, how we bring together these various tools and philosophies and specific practices, alchemy, moon and sun and fire, and a variety of things. So I have a feeling that many of you will be here today, will be very familiar with these methodologies. I also, though, want to have a conversation such that those of you who are not and perhaps are interested in learning more can also get a sense of the terrain. So um, I think just when everyone is settled in, Claudia, hey girl, summer, how's summer? Literally rocking it. Okay, all right. And Lisa, it's been a little too long. Hi, nice to see you. Okay, how's everyone feeling? Looks like we're getting some lovely greetings from everyone. Let's go ahead and just sit up before we begin. I'm going to assume, like me, we come from various activities that may or may not allow us to be fully present. So let's just take 1 minute to become more present. Okay, so please sit tall. Let's begin there. We will close our eyes. I'll ask you to. And upon closing your eyes, just immediately begin to bring your attention to your body. If you listen, your body will tell you how to be more present. So one of the things we do is we neutralize our posture. So the crown of the head over the base of the spine. With the eyes closed, many of you know that immediately upon closing the eyes and turning away from the dominant sense of sight, awareness is increased. Start becoming aware of sensations, perhaps sounds around us, perhaps the rhythm of our breath. So I'm going to invite you now to take 5 slow, complete breaths, specifically with the intention of connecting the breath to the body and the mind to the breath. So this is about as simple and direct a method as we can employ to align the first 3 levels or first 3 layers of who we are: physical, mental, energetic. And with each successive inhale, you want to just take in a little bit more air to grow the spine vertically. Just do 2 more complete rounds, please. And as you finish that last breath, go ahead now and allow the breath to slowly settle, to flow involuntarily. Return to a rhythm that is smooth and calm and balanced. And now finally, just for the last 30 seconds or so, still with your eyes closed, I'm going to ask you just to meditate on 3 words: present, moment, awareness. Let that be the concept, the idea that brings you to this moment. That reestablishes a state of coherence, unity, the present moment awareness. Okay, then just take one or two deep breaths to begin to transition outwardly. And as you're breathing in and out, just you make up your mind how you want to return to the world, to this conversation, to the moment. How do you want to show up? Okay, excellent. Okay, so take your time and come back. So, many of you are really dear friends, and we know each other quite well. And so I'm honored you're here. Going to be a refresher course, but never enough positive reinforcement. So, you had the option of downloading a study sheet for today. And by the way, this is the first pages of the, adapted from the first pages of the Tantra Shakti manual. And for those of you who don't know, one of the 4 courses, the foundation courses in our study. And first, this idea, and I think it's helpful just to be explicit about it. In the very beginning of this, of the Tantra Shakti course, I want to address a simple question, which is why study Tantra? And you can quickly deduce from this outline is I begin to describe how all of these techniques that so many of us have heard and or practice, but so many different modalities seemingly that are separate. So the Yoga Sutras never mentions the word chakra, for example, and yet so many of us think of chakra as part of yoga. It doesn't go into the description of the koshas at all, and yet koshas is really one of the most meaningful teachings within yoga practice. And it helps really guide and direct our understanding of how we move deeper, how we evolve our practices, for example. There is a reference to Kriya, but these are all terms that we hear. The word mantra doesn't actually even come up in the Yoga Sutra, I believe. There's a reference to the practice, but there isn't actually a teaching on how to do it. So what we find, and one of the first things I like to just give people some understanding about the domain of Tantra is that this is where we find all of these teachings, not just in a random way, but ultimately when in the hands of a skilled teacher, we understand how they interlace, how they interlink, how they inform each other, how they ultimately give us the most meaningful access to each of those individual practices, where all of these practices, we can think of them as independent pearls, come together on a single string. And that really, this idea of weaving these practices together into a singular tapestry is one of the meanings of the word Tantra. Tantra means knowledge, and it also means technique. It also means the capacity, the strategy of expanding ourselves, tan to stretch or expand, and tra beyond limitations. So all of these techniques, their intent is fundamentally to help us expand beyond our limitations. There's a critical idea that I learned in Tantra, and I'll just share this because I think it kind of gives us a lot of understanding about what it's all about. And that is that it may seem a little countercultural to say, and perhaps even politically incorrect to say, that the tantras are very clear that the world is not and should not, it does not help to divide the world into good and bad, into right and wrong. It fundamentally suggests that there is no such thing ultimately as right or wrong. And by the way, the Buddha acknowledged the same thing. He was very pointed that everything is empty. Everything we assign meaning to it. And of course, there's Shakespeare doing the same thing. And even Rumi, what did he say? He said, out beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field. I will meet you there. And that meeting point that is beyond right doing and wrongdoing is Tantra. Now, the tantrics had their own kind of view of it, having, let's say, reached that field beyond right doing, wrongdoing, which is, again, the mind can't really perceive of that. We're talking necessarily about a place beyond the mind, but their experience of that again and again comes back as this extraordinary current of teachings. They say that field beyond right doing or wrongdoing, it's not just empty. It's the essential good. It's the essential, but not good in that has an opposite. It's the essential beauty of life. It's the celebration of life. And it's beyond temporal awareness and rights and wrongs and good and bad and all that stuff. So what the tantrics fundamentally said was, rather than focusing on right and wrong, good and bad, which our minds will do even without trying to focus on it, is reach that place, go to a place of understanding about what works to help us thrive. Some of you know that in the last few years, I've become this avid gardener, and there's not a lecture now that goes by, especially this time of year where garden's really on my mind, where I don't speak to that. So everything in the garden, in the way we're all kind of life forms like plants, is constantly expressing this beauty. It's reaching for the best version of itself. And so what the tantras are all about, and really epitomized in the practice of Kundalini Yoga, which is a subset within tantric practice. And I'm not talking about Tantra Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, the brand. I'm talking about Kundalini Yoga that existed long before the founder of the modern approach to Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini Yoga has been practiced for thousands of years. And so the idea of it is, what Kundalini Yoga is really rooted in, is this idea of how do we bring out the best version of ourselves, focus on what works, rather than trying to partition things in good and bad. And when we reach this place beyond right doing, wrongdoing, we come into contact with the inherent good of the universe, beyond good and bad. In fact, a kind of goodness or shining or radiance or resplendence that pervades all of reality, whether we see it or not. And these practices are about how we bring ourselves to it. So what I'll suggest, and I think it's here before we get out of the pages we sent out, is that the practice is really that. It is ultimately to stretch ourselves to the fullest so that we can join with the forces of nature to be the very best version of ourselves. And that experience should pervade both our internal experience, that is, say, spiritual, self-realization, but it's also about how we bring those same forces to bear into the flow of our life, into our relationships, into our teaching, into our work, etc. So that's really at the core of Tantra. And having kind of defined the terminology, then literally what we're saying is that Tantra is a philosophy, a worldview, that inherently everything is sacred, but it's also a technology. And those of you that have studied with me, and I'm again smiling because it's a silly thing to say when I see the likes of some of you that are here, how much you've studied, how much you practice, how much you've learned, and how much now you've developed the skill to share these things in the most meaningful way and authoritative way with others. It is an amazing amount of technology. So many unique technologies. The Tantra is, one of the meanings of the word I said, is body of knowledge. And so there's about how not just we transform ourselves, but also how we bring transformational energy and prana and life force into the flow of our lives. to ground this conversation so that it does become more practical, there's a couple of things I wanted to say. And again, this may be an opportunity for those of you really familiar with these teachings to kind of reground, to kind of take a 30,000-foot view of things. One of the key teachings in this Tantra Shakti course, and by the way, there's many, and I would offer, just let me digress for a second, all of the courses, it's like I couldn't pack Tantra into one course. That would be impossible. You couldn't really do it even in 8, which is what we've done in this curriculum. But really, it required these 8 to kind of round it all out, to bring it all home, and to kind of give a full survey of the technologies we would use and that are relevant. But to ground these teachings for today's conversation, there's a core teaching within this particular course, Tantra Shakti. And that is this teaching on the moon and the sun and the fire. And so I just want to do a quick piece of that. And as I describe, and I won't take a lot of time, and I want to create an opportunity for you to reflect a little bit in this conversation. I won't take, maybe we'll go for another 15, 20 minutes or so in the conversation. And then I want to come back and give you some ideas about technology and how we meet our times. So first, let me just create the context. The context is, what do I practice to meet the moment? That's the context. And again, one of the meanings of the word Tantra is technique. But this concept of Sva Tantra is critical. Sva Tantra is like, what is my Tantra? What is my technique? What is the most meaningful, beneficial technology, method, practice for me? Sva Tantra. And the answer comes in a very specific and yet general way, which is Sva Dharma. If you tell me what your purpose is, what you're trying to accomplish, what's standing in the way of what you're trying to accomplish, that's your Sva Dharma. Like, what is going on now in your life? Then I can tell you what your methodology is. So it isn't one practice for everybody. This is one of the harder things to learn. This is one of what makes these teachings so comprehensive and so necessarily comprehensive, because it isn't saying, oh, 26 poses will heal every back injury, and there's one meditation technique for everybody. It works perfectly. No, depending on where you're at, different methodologies will work differently, more effectively. And in fact, some methodologies that may have worked at one point in your life will lose their effectiveness. They may actually be less than constructive. And we are always undergoing changes. So always we're mindful of, what is our Sva Dharma? What do we need to meet this moment fully? If I fail to water my garden, again, here's another metaphor. The plants would stop producing flowers. It stopped sending as much moisture to the flowers to keep the leaves going. And if they still didn't get enough water, I'm not in any way experimenting this way, but then they would retract their moisture even from the stalk to ensure that the roots were alive. So like nature, we want to respond to the moment. So this teaching on moon, sun, fire is something that I extracted from a combination of Ayurveda, some wisdom I got from teachers, and then some critical teachings that you find in the one of the great Tantric Hatha texts, which is the not just the Srimad Bhagavatam, but also the Granth Samahita, which is the intersection of Ayurveda and Tantra and yoga. Wonderful book, wonderful scripture. So moon, sun, fire. Basically what it's suggesting. So again, I want to keep this short, but it gives us a time to reflect. So what is the moon? It suggests there are times in our life where the most critical thing is steadiness. We need the ability to step outside of our conditions, our thoughts. In maybe somewhat in modern parlance, we would talk about down-regulating, the idea that we would slow our nervous system, we would pivot back to rest, back to quietude, back to be able to objectify ourselves and our own mind, that we would have the capacity to reflect on the condition of the mind And moreover, step outside of it and begin to one, to desensitize ourselves to the randomness of our thoughts or wherever our emotions were going, and that we could build witness consciousness. So many of us are familiar with mindfulness. In a sense, mindfulness is one aspect of developing the moon. Okay, Greg, you take care. Good to have you with us. And so the idea of cultivating the moon means, if we want to synthesize the idea, is to be more, to synthesize the mind, to synthesize the moon, which means to steady the fact that the moon is always changing, is a simile, it's a simile to the mind. The mind is always changing. And so can we ground our mind in the moment? Can we increase witness consciousness? Can we regulate our nervous system? Can we still the ripples, the disturbance in the surface of the lake, in the mind itself? And if our mind has been super stirred for a while, what starts to happen is the bottom of the lake is churned. And then it just becomes this big kind of cloudy, unclear, disturbed accumulation. And so lunar practices give us that capacity to step back, to be reestablished in stability, to find ease and calm, self-acceptance, to desensitize ourselves to the things that we are reacting from, whether those things are external or internal. That's a lunar orientation. Solar orientation. So the first would be called Chandra in Sanskrit, the second stage, if you will. And I'm being hesitant about saying second stage because depending on where we are, we may all need to start at the sun, etc. So, but the next stage, let's say, would be Surya, sun. So the metaphor of the sun is meaningful in as much as the sun is what gives us energy. These are the practices that make us robust, that begin to churn and activate our potential forces, the forces that maybe lie beneath, that remain obscured, or that are hyperactivity, our dysregulation, again, trying to weave some modern terms in here, are the fact we're in hypervigilance, hyperarousal states. What happens is we can be extremely activated and yet stagnant. We can stay stuck. And so now, in this next stage, with a foundation of steadiness, we then we pivot to this activation of life force. We're turning to the vibration, to the, let's say, untapped powers of our radiance, our resplendence, our capacity, our potency, our resilience, our life force. And not just activate those forces, but then direct them to where they will be the most helpful. And classically, those three places are either the head, the heart, or the navel center. Again, the conversation is very tantric, and many of you, it may take a while to understand what that even means. But the idea here is that we're not just pivoting to one methodology or one intention. So if you have a deficit of energy in the navel center or the heart center or the third eye center, it will lead to different qualities or conditions that may not be helpful. So the way to pivot into another level of functionality, a higher level of actualization, where you're tapping into a greater amount of your power and your self-reliance and your creativity, your imagination, the stirring of the expression of the self. It may well be time for sun, solar practices. So again, these are super condensed versions of these teachings, but for our purposes, I think it's meaningful. And then the final one, we'll talk about fire practices. And these aren't necessarily fiery. They can be, but they aren't necessarily fiery. And in this condition, or in this orientation, our emphasis is on spirit, unleashing our connection or unlocking our connection to the eternal, to the one, to essence or to the highest truth. And these practices, as I said, can vary. They can be, in some ways, potentially the most intense. We would obviously utilize in the intensity, we would utilize a skillful understanding of prana, which was in the solar practices. So that really becomes maybe the orientation of not Kundalini Yoga, the brand, but Kundalini Yoga, the subset of Tantra Yoga, which in fact we teach a lot of. But it can also mean devotion. It can also mean the most, the practices that simply align you with the highest truth, with a deep feeling of connection, which can be in many ways the most peaceful, the most heartwarming, the sense and this reminder of a living experience that you're not alone. And that more devotional or reverential, combined with this activated, enlivened sense of things. But again, it's not just for empowerment, it's purposefully to make connection. And it's to make connection to what? Let's just step back for a moment. It's the idea that the eternal and you are not two separate things. For the purpose of this conversation, it seems like there's a seeker and a sought. Right? But the deeper understanding within the tantric wisdom is that the seeker and the sought are one thing. That you being moved to want to deepen your connection to the eternal is actually the eternal moving through you. So you become more aware of that non-distinction, that non-division between seeker and sought. And again, sometimes the practices are more empowering. Sometimes the practice are super gentle, deeply devotional, but they're all very prescriptive. The practices themselves aren't, I wouldn't just give you these things to think about and make up your own methodology. Rather, there's a methodology that relates to each of these things. So here, I think I've kind of given you enough of the basis of that. So here's what I'd like you to do is I'd like just to take a couple of minutes for you to reflect. So if you don't mind, again, just sitting up, closing your eyes, sitting tall. And again, just return to the breath. Take 5, 6, 7 slow, comfortable breaths. And as you're consciously beginning to shape your breath, begin just to sense that you can move into the wisdom of the teachings, not just the words I said, but more importantly, the world that those words come from, the world of the sacred, the world that is methodical practice, a worldview that takes us beyond right doing and wrongdoing, judgment of self, judgment of others. A deep appreciation that the sacred pervades all of life, our mistakes, our struggles, as well as our most creative, benign, thoughtful, righteous actions. Relax your breath and just sense that you dwell right now in this moment. You call forward the heart of these teachings and the heart of your own inner wisdom. Now take a few moments to reflect on your current Svadharma, like who you are, what your needs are, what the challenges are right now in your life. And then please, into that, reflection, bring forward the wisdom of these three orientations to practice. Practicing to increase your stability, moon, your reflective power, your ability to see your mind clearly and to move or shift from lower mind, which is reactive, rooted in memory, past associations, and to move to the higher mind, the mind of the inner teacher, of awareness, of intuition, of viveka, discernment. Reflect on the sun, the solar practices, the practices that enliven your vital force, that stir you to move past inertia. And inertia can be rooted in overactivity or underactivity. It's as if you need a way to propel yourself past your current level of understanding and tap in to the creative force, the ceaseless expression of your higher self. Or is it time, would this be a meaningful time to connect to the one, to the eternal, to the source of beauty, the sacred, to the source of your capacity to move beyond all limitation, to rest in the heart of the divine, which is to rest in your own heart? Which of those three? Just going to give you another minute to quietly reflect. And when you feel a strong sense of one of them, just come out of the practice on your own. And write down any thoughts you have about it. Moon, sun, or fire emphasis. And whenever you're ready, bring yourself back, maybe jot down some thought, whatever thought comes to you. If one of those was clear, kind of pushing itself to the surface, the moon, the sun, or the fire was pushing itself to the surface, it may, and it's actually probably a good sign in some instances, that it surprises you. Okay, and then just very briefly before we go, what I'd like to do is talk to, maybe just give you some hints along the way. Again, a lot of you are super familiar with even probably teaching these principles who are with us on this conversation today. But for those of you less familiar, you want a recalibration, I'm more than happy to kind of reflect or offer suggestions. Okay, and I'd also just like to remind those of you who haven't been through the curriculum, all of those courses are all available. Really proud with how they were developed. I developed them over years and years, and they're online. And we do these kind of live streams regularly so that those of you who are doing the trainings online have an opportunity for this kind of dialogue and moreover for your questions. So before I offer anything, is there any offer anything as it relates to the methodologies about the moon, the sun, and the fire? Or is there anything that's come up at any point in this conversation today, or that you bring with you to this conversation today, that I can answer? So I'm open to take your questions. Maybe the best thing to do, if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand. My screen is such that I can't see everybody on it. So maybe if you just stick I think now Zoom is very smart. You can actually stick a thumb up in the air or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So you stick a thumb. Jamie, does that mean you have a question? Oh, I'm not sure it does. Okay. And Diane. Oh, I'm sorry. Diane first, and then because I saw your hand. Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, so I I could relate to all three of these, as you were going through them. But the one that caused a super reaction was the last one, the fire practice.
Mm.
And this feeling is something I've experienced lately quite a lot.
Mm.
And I feel like my heart is bursting and right out in front of me in this area. Um, and also I'm like terrified at the same time. So
Mm.
maybe we could talk about that a little bit. So it's like joyous and I want to go there, but also there's a fear, or well, more than fear, kind of a terror, kind of like I feel about the ocean. I love the ocean, but it scares me to death.
Yeah. Well, it's a great metaphor. The eternal and dedicating ourselves to the eternal. Let's say what I wanted to say was the eternal is vast and almost unfathomable. And if we really, even just thinking about the ocean from land is one thing. It feels unfathomably huge. But imagine being dropped in the middle of the ocean. I mean, how big is it then? Diane, I encourage you then, if it's something that I think I heard you say that it was even present, this kind of orientation to this fire, to the sacred, to the source, has been with you even prior to this call. And that again, it came back in this call. One of the things I took great comfort in this subject matter was when I learned that I could never do devotion perfectly. And that in fact, understanding that I could only do it imperfectly was a statement of what it meant to do it right. What I mean by that is true devotion is necessarily something that we should be overwhelmed by. We should feel disoriented by it. And that means that's the softening of the heart, the very thing you described. For decades, I was doing these practices and purposefully doing them. And yet I always had this strange feeling I wasn't doing enough. I didn't know how to do it in a way that could measure up to what I sensed was inherently unfathomable. And so I would just offer, there is a sense of the moment we open ourselves up to the vastness of our source, and we bring our highest level of sincerity to understand it, to commune with it, to surrender ourselves into it, because it is an immersion. It is like being conceivably, when we're in the spirit of it, it's like being dropped in the middle of the ocean, or at least it's like being on the ship that's going to take us to the middle of the ocean and we're about to be dropped into it. And the sense of that is, how do I pull this off? How do I measure up to this profound mystery? It's the mystery of where I've come from, the mystery of what sustains me, the mystery of what makes this thing work, called my body, for example. How many millions of operations happen every single day in the eye alone? It's so intimidating. How do we measure up to that? So here's what was greatly, meaningfully, deeply meaningful, and super comforting, was to realize that all those years I felt inadequate to the task. I was actually doing it correctly, because there will always be a certain measure of that moving into it until we're in it. And then we are home. And then we're home. And in that coming home, the doubt goes away, the judgment goes away. It's not to say it's permanent. And the other thing I would just say, because some of the intimidation factor, if I'm going to generalize just the quick extraction from what you described, some of it is we understand that some of the more advanced tantric, the hatha practices are intense and can be, one of the meanings of the word hatha is forceful. They can be forceful. We don't know if our nervous system is ready, et cetera, like that. What I want to just go back to something I said before, which is that they can be incredibly soft. The truth is that if we have the right relationship to mantra or to chanting, that is a fire practice because it's dissolving all of the thoughts around all limitation. And we just create a sense of love and reverence. We bring that to our work. So, and the final thing I'll just offer quickly is just find something that you love, that you don't feel any intimidation about loving. And whether a dog, the world, a flower, a partner, whatever that might be, or God herself, or the source itself. And just bring the love that you know to the practice. And let the love carry you, be the bridge, past the doubt, past the judgment, past the fear. And then, as you now have entered into it on the ground of love, then you progress more by beginning to consider how you're loved. What if there is something that is most benign in the universe? That the way I love, one loves is a fraction of this unconditionality that is the basis for fire practice. Now, for those of you listening to all this, I'm having a very kind of personal conversation with Diane based on her question. Let me make it really clear that fire practice isn't for everybody always. And certainly the kind of practice I'm talking about, the version of fire practice I'm talking about. My hope is that one day you'll, well, soon, not even one day, that you'll begin this journey soon, and love your approach. Take the approach of loving in a way that you're comfortable loving, and let that be the measure of how much you need to show up with it. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Lisa, missed you.
Oh, I've missed these meetings. So my question, the thing that came up for me is that, like Diane was saying, you can, kind of see the need in all of these practices, different aspects. Like emotionally, I feel like I need the moon. Mentally and physically, I feel a lot of inertia. I feel like I need the sun. And then in my heart, I feel like I need the fire. There's desire to connect more completely or even superficially at this point to my heart. I can't seem to kind of get that in there, So is it possible to use different aspects of Tantra to build this kind of trifectic sort of practice where you're utilizing all three of these, or is it better to kind of, maybe do 30 days in one practice, 30 days in another, or when there's no say 30 days, but you know what I'm saying here.
Yeah, I do. Yes. Short answer to your question is yes. That really even a fire-based practice should include elements to a greater or less extent of the two others. In order for the devotion to so we're putting devotion in the fire category, right? So in order for the devotion to be fruitful, I have to be relatively steady going into it. So I need some mood. In order to propel myself past let's say the confines of mind and move into that experience of the sacred, I need some sun. Need prana. So yes, the short answer is yes. You know, I started just to get a little inner smile when you were shooting for the trifecta, and you really very, very clearly synthesized the benefits of all three, like what they mean and the impact of all three. And so I thought, well, Rod, you're a pretty good salesman. I sold you on all three. Um, I wouldn't say yes, so there's trifecta, but I do think it's helpful to have a little bit of emphasis, just in a sense, ultimately to create a certain direction. Yeah, you can make a good soup, you know. I can make, I have a recipe book of Ayurvedic khicheris, these healing stews. And in the book I have, there's a general one. And then there's healing ones, one for the lungs, one for the liver, one for the kidneys, one for the reproductive organs. It's just a mix of different herbs, different spices, but generally speaking, the base is the same. Generally speaking, the beans are the pulses, the grain, lentils or the whatever beans change. So that's all. It's kind of like get the right kitchery, but you still need the basics. You still need the fire. Still need some heat. You still need water. You still need a grain. So yes, yes, yes. And so I'd say it's both. It's both. Yeah. But again, emphasis, what is the emphasis? Yeah. So I can maybe give a few more clues right before we sign off and give you a sense of again, at least that you've studied these principles and practices a lot. So, but I'll try and give some orientation. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And great to see you.
Me too.
Jamie, so did you have one? I'm not sure if you did or you didn't. There we are. Hi, Jamie.
Right. More on following on Lisa's question.
Hmm.
For example, is it possible, for example, to use like this trifecta method, for example, in choosing, for example, let's say, I know I need a little bit to turn on the fire, so maybe I'll use mantra meditation, but I also need that I've been I don't know, like I need some kind of joy and so maybe use kind of asana practice for that. Is it possible to, let's say, combine them in different areas, whether it's the mind, the energy, or even the physical? For example, I've been having some digestive issues, so I know that I need to work on the navel, but the world is in my life is kind of like already too fiery, so I don't want to turn it that much. So I wonder if it's possible to play with them.
Yeah, of course it is. And you too. I mean, this is where I would refer anyone back to Vinyasa Krama. Vinyasa Krama, those of you who don't know, it's the first of I consider it to be the foundation of all the trainings, because this is where where really we impart the knowledge about how to address Jamie's questions. So clearly, we can think in some ways, it's not perfect, but you can think of some ways of these three models of moon, sun, and fire. Each of them can be found in the key practices we do in Hatha. So certainly there are some asanas that are more lunar and more solar. Certainly there are different pranayama techniques that are more lunar or more solar. We couldn't really say that either of them on their own are ultimately fire, because fire is almost a contemplative experience, a devotional experience. It requires the agency of the mind reflecting into its own deep nature. I'll also introduce a concept that we speak to, and really all of the trainings are about imparting, which is there is a fundamental strategy in Tantra Yoga Alchemy. The fundamental strategy taken from the ancient tradition is our fundamental strategy is to merge the body into energy. and this is true for any good, some version of that happens in any good hatha class, right? By the time the class is done, we're less aware of ourselves as a body. And by the time we get to Shavasana, perhaps even after we leave class, there's a lightness, there's a presence, there's a sensation, there's a feeling of a current that you're being sustained from something. So fundamentally, the very foundation of these practices is converting or merging the mind into energy. Then what we do strategically, we grow from this kind of absorption into an awareness of ourselves as energetic beings. And with that, we merge the mind into that. So now the mind is submerged into its energy, into an energy awareness. And here now we have this whole kind of composite of integrating at a higher level, higher frequency that's no longer simply body oriented. And we all know our bodies are undergoing huge changes all the time. And once we pass 28, by the way, the aging process fundamentally is beginning. It's 27, 28. And then slowly but surely, the aging process accelerates as we go. So the body's not a really wonderful thing to rely on as a sense of who we are, nor is the mind. And so in both instances, what we're doing is trying to create this union of the mind to energy and the body to energy. And now suddenly we're connected to something that is limitless and fully sustained to the end of our life. Now, it may not have full expression, but that is a product of us aging and not tending to this energy body. I heard, there's this term called super agers, which is very relevant. May we all be super agers, which is basically by the end of our life, there's very little cognitive decline. Your memory is sharp, intelligence, your interactivity, all of those. There's very little cognitive decline. So one of the things that helps us do that, aside from sleep, good exercise, good diet, is yoga nidra, is meditation, is pranayama. That's real. It's real. You look at the lucidity of monks, yogic practitioners, the Tibetan monks, for example, many, many yogis, right at the end of their life, they're still as sharp and lucid and as powerful. And may we all follow in that line, right? So now the question then is, from mind and body have merged in energy. And one of the points I was going to make into your question, Jamie, was, can I use more? Maybe I'm going to be skillful about using more lunar practices at the physical level, but still lunar practice is going to bring me into a certain energetic condition informed by the moon. And then, or I use more solar practice in my physical practice related to my body. And then I use more lunar or physical practice as it relates to my mind. And, or I use more lunar practice or solar practice in my energy body. And those things absolutely. And here, now I get to kind of break out that term, alchemy. This is the alchemy of these practices. This is what you're doing. You're doing alchemy. Perhaps I do a more lunar practice physically, a more solar practice in terms of pranayama, a more lunar practice as it relates to the mind, and there's over 50 meditations in this curriculum that we do. Which one is it? So I use a more lunar practice for the mind, and ultimately in meditation, a more, let's say, fire practice, devotional practice. So absolutely, it's not uniform necessarily. We can go that way, but you can become true alchemy. That's the power of understanding and understanding the methodologies and their impact, but also then learning how to apply them elegantly. That's really what the curriculum is all about. So maybe we have time for, is that helpful? Good.
Very, very. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Enjoy. I'll be thinking about you doing your alchemy. Okay. So I think we have time for one more, if we want to do one more, and I can do that quickly. Claudia, how's it sounding? How are we doing? I get to see you in a few weeks. Look at you rocking the t-shirt.
You know, I was just gonna say, I always think about lunar as, you know, stabilizing, solar as purifying, and fire as illuminating. I just think of them in that way. Not, I don't know if that helps or anything, but.
Of course it does. I mean, why didn't you send me a note before I did my long conversation?
Well, no, because I think about when you used to teach, you'd say they would not let you progress to solar unless you had done it 12 years of lunar.
Right.
Like, so like the whole nervous system and everything has to be ready for what comes when we, you know, start to transcend.
And now more than ever.
Now more than ever. So, but I do think you can mix them like you're talking about. And I think we have to now because everything's very complicated now.
Yeah, it is. It is. See you in a few weeks.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait.
In physical presence.
Physical presence. Yes, we're working on getting people there.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So was there anyone else? Anything? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Is it Larissa? Hi. Just unmute yourself when you have a moment.
There I am.
Awesome.
Hi. Hi. So
Hi.
I've done your Four Desires curriculum, and I use the Yoga Nidra app like all the time. And I accessed this via Instagram. So I'm not actually familiar with your deeper teacher trainings. I've always like wanted to get more familiar with them. But like my finances and everything, I go really like local and accessible for me. So what kind of occurred to me as I was going through those three branches was that I was called to do different practices in different areas of my life. Like the lunar, I felt like that really applies to like relationship. And the solar really applies to like my physical asana practice. And then the devotional, like fire practices, that's what I do when I actually physically get together with other people for like bhakti and mantra and meditation groups and stuff like that. So I just kind of wanted to reflect on that and then find out, you know, how I can, if there is a way of accessing this in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so first, let's just maybe I do the second question first. So in
Okay.
Pennsylvania, you know, best thing is because my head's not really there about who physically is in Pennsylvania, but I do want to make the point that these trainings are really took a long time to develop and really were kind of based on teaching the content for decades. So please don't let finances be the thing that keeps you from doing that. Just reach out to my office. You can do rod@parayoga.com or rod@rodstriker.com. And let's figure something out. If you really are interested and passionate, we'll figure something out so you can do it. You can get access to it financially.
That's amazing.
And in terms of, and same thing about, is there someone teaching it in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia?
Yeah, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh.
I'm on the eastern side near, yeah.
Not off the top of my head, but I'm not in that space right now that's going through the Rolodex.
That's okay. I've looked and haven't found it. So yeah.
So I'm available non-locally. I'm getting up to DC in I think the first week of September, excuse me, first week of September. So maybe you can join us there.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. Okay. And in regard to what you were saying about like the focus into different areas, I mean, you're living the life. That's what it's about, is integration. And that itself, even I would make the case that that's a kind of alchemy where you know what I said in the beginning, very early on, guys, I was saying, okay, Tantra is a little less concerned about, okay, what's everyone else doing? What's the right action? What's the wrong action? It's like, what's the action that works? And so by you kind of finding the modality and the context to bring forward these three attributes, these three qualities, these three orientations, in different settings speaks to what works. And so that by its very nature, by definition, that's tantric practice. Yeah, right on. Excellent. But there's some wonderful details if you want to experience some of them. It'd be great to share them with you.
Yeah, I want to delve deeper. I
Yeah.
found these practices that you've shared so transformative.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. Well, the world needs as many emissaries as possible. So listen, again, I'll just close by just mentioning again, those of you who might be interested in the courses that we're kind of doing a sale right now and making them accessible. And we're about to transition to a beautiful new platform where all of this stuff is going to be available in a kind of better way. And the truth is that I'll be doing more live streams from it. And I'm excited about this next phase and excited to continue to support you and that we can support each other and collectively we can be stronger in what it is we do and feel, is our unique calling. There's no question these methods speak to that. They reinforce the best in us. They support us in that way. And in a way then allows us to all individually in our own unique expression serve what is the field out there beyond right doing and wrongdoing. And that's the basis of peace. It's the basis of knowing. It's the basis of finding ourselves and fruitful life. So thank you for joining us today. Reach out, any further questions, and look forward to the next time. Okay. Hariom. Om Tat Sat. See you soon.